Okay, let's unpack this deep dive. You share sources digging into a really fascinating, almost mysterious object from the Hebrew Bible, the Urim and Thummim.
Right. And the interesting thing, the really wild thing, is that the Bible itself never actually gives us a physical description.
Exactly.
But
So
right.
what did they look like? That's the big question. And our sources today explore one very specific claim, a particular artifact.
Yeah. One described by Dallas James in his work, The Urim Thummim Arises.
So importantly, we're not trying to solve the whole Urim and Thummim mystery in general here.
No, definitely not.
We're focusing, really zeroing in on the description of this specific artifact as presented by the author, especially its features, the girl content.
And this quite surprising hypothesis has linking it to ancient Philippine traditions, something called the Bislig gold standard.
Right. So what does the source material actually say about whether that connection is historically plausible or, metallurgically possible? And maybe what does this whole case study tell you about evaluating these kinds of specific artifact claims? Let's jump in.
Okay. So the artifact itself, as described in the source, it's quite detailed. We're talking a small, flat, oval stone, a jasper.
Jasper. Okay.
Noted for being blood red, but with hints of blue in it. Size-wise, roughly 2 by 2.5 centimeters across, something like that, and about 3 centimeters high.
And attached to it, the source mentions a pure gold base.
Yeah, affixed right on top, with these really intricate engravings described: a couchant lion,
Like lying down.
yeah, resting but alert, and a serpent and a tree. And there are these 7 engraved eyes mentioned.
7 eyes. Okay, where?
2 on the lion, 2 on the tree, and 3 on the serpent. And apparently the lion's eyes are special, described as maybe sapphire or garnet. Known for flashing,
Brightness.
Huh. Interesting detail. And there's more. The source even points out that the natural lines, the strata, within the jasper stone itself apparently seem to show the number 7.
Wow. Okay.
The craftsmanship is described as, well, exceptionally precise. Almost the implication is maybe divine or non-human.
But here's a really key detail, like an empirical finding from the source, right? The acid testing.
Yes. That indicated the gold is 12 karat.
12 karat. Okay.
Now, the author, he interprets all this symbolism, the lion is Judah or Christ, the tree is life or the brand seeds, the serpent is Satan, the 7 eyes is the Lord's eyes, maybe angels.
Right. Standard interpretations in some circles.
And based on all that, he makes some big claims. He says this specific object is the Christ stone of Scripture, it is the Urim Thummim, and even, get this, the Holy Grail.
Whoa. Okay. That's a lot rolled into one artifact.
Okay.
And that physical description is so specific, which, like we said at the start, is striking because mainstream biblical scholarship is pretty clear. The Bible gives no explicit physical description.
Exactly. So that's crucial context here. This artifact is one the author identifies as the Urim Thummim, based on his own interpretations. It's not like it's a universally accepted biblical relic with a clear ancient history.
Right. And didn't the source mention an appraisal?
It did. An appraisal back in 2001 apparently labeled it judicious Zionist art, which kind of suggests, a modern symbolic piece, not necessarily an ancient biblical artifact.
Okay. So let's park the author's interpretations for a second and really focus on that 12-karat gold finding. That feels more concrete.
It is. And the source mentions the author found this interesting because apparently he had trouble finding 12K as a common modern standard.
Right. You don't see it as much as, say, 10K, 14K, 18K.
Precisely. So that difficulty sort of prompted him to look into ancient origins instead.
That search led him,
Okay.
or this is the surprising part,
To the Philippines, specifically the context of pre-colonial Philippines, as described in the source. It talks about a really rich, sophisticated gold-working tradition there. They even had a documented indigenous system for classifying gold purity.
Okay. And within that system?
The source identifies this specific standard called Bislig. And Bislig, it says, corresponds to 12 carats, 50% gold purity. The word itself apparently means hardened or petrified.
So the author draws a direct line.
A very direct line. Connected the 12-karat gold of his artifact, the one he has, to this specific pre-colonial Philippine Bislig standard.
And then weaves that into his bigger picture.
Absolutely. It becomes part of his theological framework. He talks about gold from paradise, suggesting the Garden of Eden might have been near Bislig in the Philippines. He even mentions his wife's hometown being there as sort of prophetic confirmation for him.
Okay, that's definitely a unique narrative connecting those dots. Now, putting this 12K purity and this Philippines Near East link into context,
Yeah.
what does the source say historically?
Well, it acknowledges that, yeah, ancient gold in the Near East and Mediterranean was often higher purity.
Yeah.
20, 22, 23 carats wasn't uncommon.
Right.
But crucially, the source also notes that 12-karat gold was metallurgically achievable back then. It wasn't impossible.
Like how?
It mentions, for instance, an ancient Egyptian recipe called diplosis. This was a known technique specifically to create 12-karat gold by intentionally mixing gold with set amounts of copper and silver.
Ah, so 12K wasn't some super rare secret thing only found in one place. It could be made intentionally elsewhere.
Exactly. That Egyptian example shows 12K gold wasn't necessarily confined to one region in antiquity. It challenges the idea that finding 12K must point to a single specific origin like Bislig.
Okay, but what about the possibility of connection? Did stuff travel that far?
Well, here's a really fascinating detail the source brings up. It mentions historical evidence of, and I'm quoting here loosely, gold jewelry of Filipino origin found in ancient Egypt.
Whoa, really? Filipino gold in ancient Egypt?
That's what the source claims,
Mm.
yeah. Now, let's be super clear. This does not verify the author's specific artifact or its identity as the Urim Thummim.
Right, right. Important caveat.
But what it does do is provide a potential mechanism, ancient trade routes. It suggests that historically it was possible for materials, maybe even metallurgical know-how, to travel between Southeast Asia and the Near East way back then.
So it adds a layer of historical plausibility to the general idea of materials moving between those regions, even if it doesn't prove anything about this specific artifact.
Precisely. It makes the concept of such long-distance connections less, perhaps less far-fetched than it might initially seem.
And ultimately, the source shows how the author takes that empirical finding, that the 12K gold, and this idea of hardened Bisley gold, and integrates it all into his personal belief system.
Yeah, it really highlights that interplay, doesn't it, between a specific material detail and a much broader, subjective, interpretive framework.
So wrapping this deep dive up, we didn't tackle the Urim and Thummim broadly, but zoomed in on one specific described artifact claimed to be it.
We looked at its description, that 12-karat gold finding, and followed the author's very unique hypothesis, linking it all the way to an ancient Philippine gold standard, Bislig.
And we found that, okay, while the artifact itself and its claimed identity are definitely outside mainstream scholarship,
The historical context provided in the source does offer some interesting food for thought. The fact that 12K gold could be intentionally made anciently, like in Egypt.
and the mention of historical evidence, however debated, for actual trade links like Filipino gold potentially reaching Egypt.
Right. It suggests the potential for materials and knowledge to have traveled vast distances, much further than we might sometimes assume.
This whole case study, I think, really shows how just one detail, like gold purity, can open up these huge historical and geographical questions.
And how empirical findings can get woven into these very personal, sometimes prophetic narratives. It really underscores that challenge, trying to separate verifiable history and material science from interpretation when you're looking at religiously significant objects.
Definitely. So here's something for you, the listener, to think about. Considering this complexity, ancient trade, diverse metal practices across cultures, differing accounts even within regions like Bislig, what could modern, independent material analysis techniques actually tell us, maybe definitively, about the true origin of the gold in objects claimed to be ancient? What layers of history, trade, and belief might that kind of science peel back?